Lacy Bethea Jr.
Thank you. When were you born?
October 1, 1929,
And where were you born?
Wilmington, North Carolina.
I see. And let's see. So can you tell me a little bit about your family? Your parents?
Well, my daddy was a farmer, and though I was born in Wilmington, North Carolina, I grew up in Latta, South Carolina, a small farming community, and I wasn't living on a farm. I did work on a farm sometime, but not on a steady basis. I was a city slicker, as they call us. And my mother was born in Cheraw, South Carolina, and my daddy met her and they got married, and I'm a result of that marriage. And I left that area in 1946 when I joined the Marine Corps. And I haven't been back to live there yet. And once you leave home, you can't go back to the home you left. It's changed. And then I joined the Marine Corps in 46. Didn't know what was 1946. I did not know what was going to happen. I was 17 years of age and wanted to be in some type of armed forces, and I selected the Marine Corps. I haven't forgotten that. And then, of course, 46, 47, 48, and then 49. 4 years, I was about 20, I was a buck sergeant. And then the 25th of June came along, and I got married 7 days after that, and had already planned it, but that was the way it turned out. And I was on the way was transferred from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to Camp Pendleton, where we took training and did quite a bit of other things. We had to have some weekend liberty and overnight liberty and so forth, so take some of the stress out of preparing for combat, and people don't think there is stress in that, but it is. You are wondering what's going to happen, and you worry, you concern yourself, or at least I concern myself with that. I won't say I worried, because that's what we train for, and what you train for is what you can expect. If death happens, it happens, and nothing you can do about it. So I wound up in Korea, made the landing at Incheon, and I was supposed to go in on D+1. I went on the afternoon of D+2. I went in on the afternoon of D+1. About 2 hours after the initial landing, it's at 17:30 on the afternoon of 15th of September.
D+1, D+2, that means day.
Yes, D1, D-Day is the day of D-Day. That's the day of the landing. I was supposed to go in on D+1. I went on late afternoon D-Day. And when the lieutenant caught up with me, he wanted to know what I was doing back, and I said, well, I had a chance to take a boat down to the beach, and I did. Mm-hmm. And I'm still here.
Yeah. Before you went to Korea, when you first heard about the Korean War, did you know about Korea at all?
No. When we first heard about it, I was home on Weekend Liberty, and my mother came in my bedroom on Sunday morning and says, "Son, get up. Come tell us what's happening." And I put on a pair of pants and shoes and went back to the kitchen. Mom handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Listen." A few minutes later, I heard a newscaster come on saying what had happened in Korea. And then that the North Korean People's Army, NKPA, had attacked South Korea along the 38th parallel, with the majority of troops being headed toward Seoul and a smaller group of NKPAs were going down the East Coast. And my mom asked, "Where is Korea?" "I don't know, I've never heard of it." Went out into a pantry and got a 8 or 10-inch globe of the world and tried to find it, and we couldn't find it. And we kept radios open to the news and had breakfast and went on to a church, and the pastor didn't know any more than we did. And we went home. I went home and had dinner and borrowed my dad's car and went out to see my fiance, and her father had been in World War I. First thing he asked, "You think W.A., his son, will go?" And I said, "I don't know, but I don't think so, because he is the only son. And if he is drafted, he'll probably go to some place other than a non-combatant area, like Alaska or some other place where he's not in combat, since he is the only son." And as it turned out, that's what happened. And so we got married, and I went back to Camp Pendleton and, Camp Lejeune, and me and 3 sergeants started some training of our troops, what little we had to train. And we did quite a few things. And at that time, I was in Baker Company, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. And we worked Monday through Friday on doing various and sundry articles of training and getting ready for whatever might happen. And then sometime later, I got off on Friday, got a long weekend, and went home and got married by a preacher, went on a short honeymoon and came back and went back to the base on Sunday night. And on Monday morning, the duty NCO walked into the squad bay and said, "Sergeant Bethea, the skipper wants to see you." I said, oh well, that's not, well. Anyway, I went and found out that all the platoon sergeants were waiting to see the company commander or the skipper, and he says, "Guess what, man, we're leaving next Sunday morning at 0900 to go to Camp Pendleton." Oh. So that came as quite a surprise, and we knew it was coming, didn't know when. I'd just gotten back from a short honeymoon, so I called my family. I only lived 175 miles from the base. I called my parents, asking them to go out and tell my wife to pack a suitcase and bring some clothes to last all week. I'm coming down. I borrowed a car. I'm going to pick her up and get a motel or a hotel for us to stay in. So that's what happened. And then the skipper let me off about 4 o'clock Monday afternoon, and I drove home, saw my parents, went out and picked my wife up, talked to her parents and her brother, and came back, saw my parents again, and drove up to Jacksonville, North Carolina, and on to the base. Returned the guy's car after I got to the base, but we got a motel, and I got a hotel rather, and it was filling up fast, and I was lucky to get a room that would last all week. And so Tuesday morning, I went out and talked to the skipper, and he said, what happened? I told him that I picked my wife up and stayed in a certain hotel, my room number. He said, well, you can get off every afternoon and be back in by 7:30. And I need your room number so I can call you in case something else happens. So nothing happened. We had some of the training we had done. We had inspections of our personal equipment, our clothing and combat gear, and we had already received a sufficient amount of clothing and combat equipment to equal what we were required to have. So we didn't have to do any hurry-up work. So we helped our supply sections start packing up boxes and loading it aboard trucks and putting it in areas so we could keep it all separate. And then it was later loaded aboard trucks and put aboard box cars and shipped to Camp Pendleton. Then when we left we managed to stay all night, all day, and work, and then I got off about 1600, went in, changed into a service uniform, and went into a motel, and we went out to dinner. We met some of the people that my wife had met during the day, families, and that were coming down to see their sons off. And then we went to movies, went things out, and a couple of families took us out to dinner and met some of the other guys that weren't in my outfit, but you know, we all wore the same uniform, so it didn't make any difference. And we got to meet quite a few people and their concern for their sons. So on Thursday morning, my family and my two sisters, my parents and two sisters, told me on Wednesday they were coming up to see me Thursday morning. So I told the skipper this, and he said, well, I'd like to meet your parents. And so when I didn't have to come in early that morning, so when they drove up and saw us at the hotel, we went out to the base, and we got the kids, my sisters, out of the car, and you should have heard all the cat calls and the whistles and everything else, but they were just young teenagers. So I went in and told the skipper that the skipper of my family is out here, my two sisters. Well, bring them in. So I did, and introduced him around, and he says, sorry, Bethea, would you excuse us a bit? So I said, yes, sir. So I left the room. And I never knew what the skipper, I think his name was Blair, Captain Blair, said to my parents and two sisters. But all they told me was he had told them what me and three other sergeants were doing with the Marines we had in the company. And that was it. I do not know how much detail and so forth, but that's all they said. And I respected them for that and didn't bug them or ask them for anything that I may have would like to have known. And so my wife was along. We took them around the base and showed them this, that, and the other. Had lunch somewhere on the base and drove them back into the base, into Jacksonville, which we call Jayville. Jacksonville's too hard to say. Drove them into Jayville and shook hands and kissed the girls goodbye, and that was it. And then that was on a Thursday afternoon. They had to get back home in time. And Friday was fine. And then Saturday morning, because we were leaving early Sunday morning, Saturday morning, I took my wife to the bus station and kissed her off and said, this is it, I'll write you when I can. So that's how we left. And then we got aboard the train the next day. We spent most of Saturday playing cards, cribbage, or Crazy Eight, or some of the other card. We didn't play any poker. Some of the other card games that we were interested in playing and entertaining ourselves. And then trying not to answer the obvious question, what do you think is going to happen, Sergeant? You know, I said, you know how much I do. Well, then we boarded the train Sunday morning, and it was a Pullman train, locomotive, steam locomotive. And we got aboard the train, and we'd already had breakfast in the mess hall. And I was sitting up there, and we were at a table in our Pullman car, and we were playing casino. And I looked out the window, pulling into Florence, South Carolina, which was a main train stop for water, rations, food, oil, and anything else they may need. And there's my family outside, my father and mother and two sisters. So I got off the train. I saw the conductor, and he says, well, we're going to be here about 2 hours because the engine has got to go water, oil, and we got to take food for the Pullman diner and so on. So I went back aboard the train, told my guys they could get off, but be back at a certain time and not to go too far. Don't leave the train station where you can buy, drinks and stuff to eat. And some of them had seen my family on Thursday, and they all recognized them, and they whistled and flirted with my oldest sister, who was a blonde. And she really didn't know what to do. So then the conductor blew his whistle, and my men knew there's only 29 of us because we were under strength. They heard the whistle, and they came back, and told my corporal to follow them in and count and make sure we had everybody, and wave goodbye to my family, which they did. We got aboard the train, and that was it. And 5 or 6 days later, we were in Camp Pendleton. And we got there one afternoon, and were bused out to a portion of the camp that held the camp name, left over from World War II, Tent Camp 2. But there was no tents, there's Quonset huts. So we were firmly tied up in those, and we got all squared away and got our bunks made and everything else, and finally found where things were. And the next morning, either that morning or the next morning, the second morning, duty NCO stuck his head in the door, and I knew he wanted me. And he said, "Sergeant Bethea," and I said, "What?" And he said, "Skipper wants to see you right away, and our ASAP." So I went down to company office and walked in, tried to knock on his door, and the skipper's door, and he says, "Come in, Sergeant Bethea. Do you know you kept me kept me up until 2400 last night?" I said, "No, sir, I was in my bunk." And he said, "No, that's not what I mean. The first sergeant and I were looking for you." And I said, "Captain, what for?" He says, "You're the only man in the battalion that has a particular MOS, job title. And you're the only one in the battalion that knows anything about embarkation and ship loading." And I said, "Oh." He said, "Now you are to report to Captain Coffee, the battalion S4, after sealed." Well, anyway, see the first sergeant first, and then he'll take you to see Captain Coffee, not the first sergeant, Sergeant Major. And I did that, and I walked in, and the Sergeant Major saw me. He says, "There's Captain Coffee right over there. I'll be down there in just a moment." So he took me over to Captain Coffee's office. I said, "Good morning, sir, Captain Sergeant Bethea." And he says, "Yes, I know who you are. You kept me awake last night." So that kept. And so I stayed awake with, same thing with my company commander. I kept him awake, and he was looking for me, and he says, "You got all sorts of talent listed in your SRB," and SRB is Service Record Book, "and you're going to be a benefit to me in my section, my S4 section, and you're going to be, after you get the ship loaded, you're going to be my ammunition man and my battalion armorer, which is repairing firearms." He said, "Now you're supposed to go up to regimental headquarters and see." He says, "Think of it, there's regimental headquarters right over there." They were sharing an office, and you were to see the Sergeant Major, and he was going to take you to see Captain Smith. I said, "Oh, him?" I said, "I know him." And so we got that done, and went up to see the regimental Sergeant Major. He took me in to see Captain Smith. He says, "Nice to see you again, Sergeant. I understand you kept a lot of people awake night before last." I said, "Yes, sir. That's the story is going around." So then he said, "Well, we got a job for you." He says, "Come over here with me," and he took me over to another part of the building. Now, this building was housing battalion headquarters and regimental headquarters, 1st Battalion headquarters, and regimental headquarters, and then we had 2 offices for the regimental commander and his adjutant, and executive officer, and for the battalion commander and his XO. So he said, now you'll be working at these 2 tables, and you will, here's the loading diagrams for the USS. I said, I recognize the USS Noble APA 218, because I had been doing that before, back in back in 47, 48, and part of 49. And I said, I recognize it. And he said, this is the forms, this is the amount of equipment and vehicles that each of the companies have in battalion, and what regimental H&S has. You're going to be loading that on paper. I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, right now you got to go get squared away. Captain Coffey's is going to loan you his man, so he'll help you move, change quarters, which he did, and report back to me at 1300, 1 o'clock that afternoon. So I said, yes, sir. So I went back, traced my steps all the way back, and Corporal, can't think of his name. Anyway, Captain Coffey's clerk borrowed the captain's jeep, took me over to my Quonset hut, helped me load all my stuff aboard the captain's jeep, took me over to where the battalion H&S was living, and I made my bunk and did it, put my gear away and locked everything up, and I wrote some letters and went to noon chow and showed up with Captain Smith's office at 1300. And he said, okay, I'll take you back over there again. I didn't realize when he did this that one table stuck into the battalion and the regimental commander's office, and the other table stuck into the general part of the building. So I sat down and went through all the papers and saw what I had to do and knew what I had to do. And I had to tape all the loading diagrams to the deck, to the tabletop, cut little templates for the vehicles, and number them and label them and find out who owned which vehicle. And I was doing some other things. This went on the rest of the afternoon. Came back from evening chow, and about 6:30 and worked till 9, and mostly getting all the papers and all the cubic feet, all the dimensions of the vehicles, and how much equipment we had, what type it was, what company it belonged to, and so forth. And went back to the barracks at 2100 and took a shower, hit the rack, and started all over again the next day. Well, after about the second or third day, I was working on, I was inserting the vehicle templates in some of the hole spaces where they would be stored aboard the ship, all over the ship, except in one or two portions of the ship. And I heard these boats come walking down, and all of a sudden I heard the boat stop, and I said, I wonder where they went. Looked around, and here was the regimental commander, Colonel, and I want to say this. Colonel, I was going to say Burwell Puller, but I knew better than to say that. It was Colonel Puller, Chesty Puller, a Marine Corps legend. And I said, good afternoon, sir. And Colonel Puller had the habit of addressing everybody by saying, good morning or good afternoon, old man, how are you? And that was it. Your answer better be just fine, sir. Because just as soon as I saw this man, I knew who he was, what he was, and the camaraderie that existed between him and the men. And I won't go into any more of that now because later on something else happened. And I will too. Just his presence of you, the grunt, seeing this man, you knew everything was going to be okay. You wouldn't have any problem, and you knew you were going to come out on the other side. After you tore the hinges off the gates of hell, you'd be out on the other side. And that was what he instilled in the men. And what he asked me for after we got things settled down, he said, I want to know where all my Jeeps are. Now, these vehicles would, these commanding officers, their vehicles would be the first thing needed on the beach. And his had to be, his and his company commanders had to be among the first. The regimental commander was loaded in the top part of the ship, but he didn't necessarily make the initial landing in wave number 1. He had to have time for the companies to get together, and then after they had things under situation, then he would come ashore and take command. And then we got the ship loaded, and I still did not have an embarkation officer. And also one afternoon, this lieutenant walked in, and he says, I'm Lieutenant, I don't remember, maybe it'll come to me. I'm Lieutenant, I just finished the embarkation school in Little Creek, Virginia, and I am the embarkation officer. What have you done? I said, everything's ready to go, Lieutenant. And I briefed him on, showed him the loading diagrams, and everything else, and what had been done, and how the ship was loaded, and how much was loaded. And then I had to, these diagrams had to be put on paper, put on this, I forget what you call it. It wasn't ditto paper, it was mimeograph paper. Okay. Had to be put on mimeograph forms, drawn in, typed up, and printed out, and copies distributed to various and sundry people who had to see it. And that had already been done. And then I'd called Colonel Puller in and showed him where all the Jeeps were loaded. And after saying good afternoon, old man, how are you? And so forth. It was the same thing every time he saw you. And then I told this lieutenant, I said, Lieutenant, tomorrow morning I'm going to take my gear and I'm going down to a naval station in San Diego with H&S Company. He said, no, you aren't either. You're going to wait till tomorrow afternoon, and I got us a ride down to San Diego in a privately owned vehicle. And so we did that, got up next morning. So we just sat there and played cribbage, he and I, and we did a few other little things, and there was nothing to do. It's all been done. And everything was moving properly and smoothly down to San Diego Naval Station. And then late that afternoon, after evening chow, this vehicle came up, and there was captain, 1, 2, 3 lieutenants, including my lieutenant and me. And I threw my gear in the trunk of the car and got in the back seat. And the lieutenant was talking and up and talking to his captain. One of them was the captain's XO. And they finally introduced me to this captain, and that was Captain, God, he was a commandant. Captain,
so many names.
Captain Barrow. And we traveled down. I was part of the conversation, and he had heard that I had caused a lot of people lost to sleep, and he had heard that, and he told me the same thing all the other officers told me. On the way down, he says, Bethea, if you got khaki in your sea bag up top where you can get to it? I said, yes, sir. He says, well, we're going to stop at this hotel, and you're going to change into khaki, and you might have to wear boondockers in, and we're going to go in, we're going to have a beer or two, and your beers are on me. So we went in, we had a couple of beers, and I shared some stories with them, and you know how servicemen talk. And so we finally went down to San Diego. One of the lieutenants helped me carry my gear up the gangplank, and I found where in the berthing compartment I found an empty bunk to my satisfaction, and looked up the embarkation or the combat cargo officer and the his assistant aboard ship. And I finally found him and introduced myself, and I got a tour of the ship and found out who things were, and I met Captain, his name, but this Staff Sergeant's name was Staff Sergeant Claude A. Sams. And the reason I reckon that he had a big solitary diamond on his right finger. And I didn't ask him about it, but anyway, we saw to it that the ship was loaded, and the things I did not have to load because they were already preloaded were ammunition, rations, and water, and petroleum products. That had all been loaded at previous ports. The only thing we were responsible for loading was the vehicles and the combat equipment. And we got the ship loaded, and one afternoon I heard a sound I didn't want to hear because the tuggers came alongside, and I heard the skipper of the ship or the boatswain mate of the watch call off, single up all lines on dock or some command like that. He singled up all the mooring lines on areas of the ship. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I heard the captain say, "Cast off all lines," and then the ship's steam whistle went off, board, siren, and anything else. And that meant that we were setting sail, and we were no longer we were no longer connected to the United States. We were no longer connected.
What makes you choke up like this? Just thinking about that moment?
We were no longer connected to the United States. We were no longer connected to the United States of America, and we were going into combat, and that and every time I hear that type ship's whistle, it still bothers me. Well, we set sail along with several other ships, and I had friends in several different companies, and we all went down to the mess deck and had evening meal, and some was carried our own private steel coffee cups, and we walked out and went out to the fantail and told jokes and smoked cigarettes, and some of us had cigars, and watched the sun go down as best we could, because we had to look around either the port or starboard side. And we knew that we were on the way, and then a lot of the emotions that were felt were no longer displayed, or weren't displayed, or they were hidden. And the tenor of the Marines and the sailors aboard ship changed to where it was more favorable, and the joking around and playing cards and smoking cigarettes and telling lies and on and on and on, as servicemen are prone to do. And then sometime later, we weren't too far from Japan, and at that time we didn't know exactly where we were going in Japan. We found out that morning it was Kobe, Japan, and I think it was the XO who came on the ship. He says, "All you Marines aboard, look back on the mast of number 3 or 4, hole space. Look up on the top of the mast and you'll see an albatross." He's been there. He's been there all night, and for the ancient mariners felt that the albatross landing and attaching itself to your ship was a symbol of good luck. So we all took that in stride, and we pulled into Kobe that morning. It's Sunday morning, and the staff sergeant and I were sitting in his office playing cribbage, and after morning chow, and we heard all these people running up and down the deck. So I said, "Sam's, what is going on?" And he said, "I don't know, let's go out and see." Well, what was going on was that we were right into the middle of a full-blown typhoon. And the USS Noble was attached by two steel cables to a bollard on the pier at the bow end and the stern end of the ship, and two tugs were trying to push us back in. And that took all day. And we finally got late in the afternoon, that Sunday afternoon, we were anchored, and the typhoon was blowing over, but we doubled and quadrupled all the lines with all the bollards, and then we slacked off the next couple of days. We had to completely unload the ship of all the equipment and vehicles and start putting them in, putting this stuff in warehouses. Then we had to reload the ship and fix it up for a combat load. How much stuff you're going to need, and all this other stuff is going to be left in Kobe. So the ship was lightly loaded, and when we left San Diego, it was tightly loaded, and some of the hatch boards on some of the that you put on top of a hatch had to be tamped down by vehicles, because that's how much stuff we had, and it was stuff. So the Noble, USS Noble, rode a little bit higher when we left a few days later, and then we found out exactly where we were going, and we had a briefing, D-1, which is one day before D-Day, and where we were going to be landing, what time of the day we were going to be landed, and we were issued all our ammunition and all the rations we were going to need. And that put the icing on the cake, because we knew we were going to be in combat that night, and or sometime. The one regiment, I think it was the 5th Marines, landed at Walmedo Island, or a peninsula, or it might have been an island with a causeway built out to it, where the communications equipment and a lighthouse. And then the 1st Marines, my outfit, was going to be landed next afternoon at 5:30, and it was still light, and many of us watched a amphibious exercise take place, these small boats going into the water, the LVTs and other things, and knowing what was happening and going to happen when they got to Walmedo, which they did with rather quickly because there were not many soldiers on from North Korean People's Army only on it. So that place, Walmedo Island, was taken with no casualties. And then that afternoon, 1st Marines Regiment, 1st Regiment was going to land at 17:30. And we were going to make the landing at Incheon on Red Beach. And we didn't know what, we had had some intelligence coming from what we could expect. The tide at that seawall was 32 feet, the highest it's been in many a day. And we had, the Navy had composed scaling ladders to reach the top of the seawall and down into the boat so that the Marines could go over. And then several of them did, and the grenade landed, and this lieutenant threw himself on the grenade, and he was killed. And then that was 1st Marines exposure to combat since World War II. And I found out that I had all my gear ready to go, and I found out there were some small boats going in to Red Beach, and I got my gear together and went down to cargo net and got into Red Beach sometime that night. And of course, I was not in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd waves. I was either in the 4th or 5th, and nothing was 1,000 yards or more in in the city of Incheon, and everything was going according to schedule. Mm-hmm. And I was there the next morning when the lieutenant came on, my lieutenant, and he's a little chagrined because he found me there and I beat him to the beach. It didn't enter my mind that was going to be a problem, but he kind of thought it was a problem. I didn't. So we got a ride, found a guy going up, recognized the insignia on it for 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, and he took us up to battalion headquarters, and we got off and we found the S4, and I went, Captain Coffey told me I was going one way and the lieutenant was going another way, and for me to find battalion supply where it had all my ordnance equipment and all the ammunition, anything else that I was going to be in charge of. And there I went. And I finally found them, and the supply section was already on the beach. Everything was unloaded, rations, water, oil, gasoline, ammunition was all unloaded. But I saw that all the ammunition for the battalion was loaded in one area, and I said, we can't do that. And later on that morning, we got transportation, and I made sure that the ammunition was broken down into 3 parts, basically equal amounts in each truck. And that was the way we played the war until later in the week. And then I happened to see a dispatch, a message that was sent out from the command ship, and command was passed ashore. That meant that General O.P. Smith, the division commander, and his staff had command of the division on the beach, and we were no longer under the landing force task force commander. The task force commander was a Navy admiral, and everything was under him. He was responsible directly to General MacArthur. And when command was passed ashore, that meant that the landing force commander, the task force commander, was no longer in charge. The landing force commander was, and that in this case was General O.P. Smith. And that meant that the Marines were on their own, all three regiments and supporting units. And it's kind of a scary situation when you hear it for the first time as to what is going to happen and or what is happening. And if something happened badly, command could have passed back to the task force commander, the admiral. But nothing bad happened, and he just had to make sure that there was enough personnel and equipment and everything else ashore before he, the admiral, relinquished command and gave it to the senior commander, in this case, General Smith. So that was it, and we kept up. We slept at night, we stood to watch, and things like so, and we came to the home. We were in somewhere, some of the Marines or land came across a beer factory. No, it wasn't a Asahi. Do you know what beer it was? I forget, it was Korean beer, but anyway. And then we ran across Kimpo Airfield, and that was a small airfield, and we ran across some other areas, and we kept getting supplies. We'd issue supplies in the morning, regiment, people in division, ordnance battalion would send ordnance gear, ammunition forward. It would go to regiment. Regiment would issue it out and send it to battalion. And the same thing, other parts of supply, the rations, the water, everything else came in on different trucks. And then we set up and we moved, unloaded, freed the trucks, and then the companies came up with their platoon guides, and we had the morning report of how many men they had. We issued rations. The C rations were, a ration was food for one man for one day, 3 meals. So we would issue rations sometime after Reveille or after dawn and before 10, 11 o'clock, and they would issue the ration out to the troops so that he would have he would have the noon meal, the evening meal, and breakfast, and 2 meals for the next day. We were one day ahead so that they wouldn't run out of rations and water and ammunition. And we knew something about ammunition because how much ammunition was required in combat, and it took so many rounds of carbine ammunition, rifle ammunition, mortars, and any other ammunition that we had. It was called a unit of fire. And that we...
Mr. Bethea, but we might have the next interview come anytime now.
Yeah.
But so I just wanted to let you know, in case you want to definitely say something before we have to close, or you want to maybe come back. Just want to let you know.
I think I can do it and so forth, because this is what I'm going to tell about. We kept this same routine up for day after day after day. Then we came up, we got some special trucks. They were called ducks, DUKWs, which meant dual utility cargo waterborne. So we loaded up our trucks and we crossed the Han River. And as we crossed the Han River, we were about 7 or 8 days in, I don't know how many days in combat we were, but we sat up at an area, and here were South Korean refugees. And this father and a mother and a daughter worked up and came by the trucks that I was on and had their problems, was in charge of. And this girl, I know not how old she was, but she looked to be about 20 plus, and she had a gap in her left arm from the shoulder joint all the way down to the elbow. There was no blood, there was no veins or arteries broken or cut, no muscles or anything else that was cut. You could see them moving. I do not know how it cut, but I yelled for Corpsman. And I finally got a Corpsman. He came up and he did what he could to this girl. And he couldn't stitch it because it was too open. It was a good 3 inches open. Wow. And she didn't seem to be in any pain. And if she was, she didn't show it. And then we found somebody that could talk, would speak a little. We got a message over that for her mother, take her to a doctor so her injury could be sewn up and so forth. And you know, that's been 60 some odd years ago. Could be my age, 86, 87, 88. I just wonder really what happened to her. And that was the main thing that I wanted to get across. And also one of our trucks in the battalion I was in had sea rations aboard. And somehow or the other, the tailgate flew open, and there was 2 boxes of sea rations. And I looked at her father and I said, and you know, I turned around again, it was gone. I don't know where it went. And all I saw was 2 empty boxes and 2 sleeves that went around the box, because it had to be, I found out later that it had to be hidden so that the South Korean civilians who were acting as militia or police, whatever, wouldn't bother them. But anyway, I just wonder what happened to her, because she was I could tell that the father and the mother and this young lady was doing this after not only to more to the Coleman than to me, because I couldn't do any of that. All I did was get him there for it. And I just wondered ever since that day what happened to her. And
Wow, that's so
what,
gracious of you.
Pardon?
You could have just passed them. Are you doing this? Yeah. Okay. Can you help them get? Just call them. Can you get them like the sign-in sheet?
Just anyway, she could be dead now. I don't know. I wonder if she got married. I wonder if she had kids. All that has gone through my mind since then. And after having been in Korea, and if she had kids, they would be in their 30s and 40s, and she would be a grandmother, and you know, they'd have baby sons, and I just wonder what happened. I do not know her name. I remember I cannot fully remember what she looked like, except she was very attractive and very appreciative of what was done. And I don't know, I just don't know what happened.
Well, I think even if she passed away the right next day, I feel like since you did that for her, she was so happy, so grateful to have been treated that way by this complete stranger from the other side of the world. I'm feeling that way right now. I feel like I'm in her shoes. I was like picturing that scene. So I think I hope you feel just so happy about that too, that you got the chance to help
her.
Her.
I just told him this when I was in Korea. And then it hit me hard. And I told the people, the Koreans I was talking with, I will not apologize for my emotions.
There's no need to apologize for your emotions.
Because that's the way I felt for what I did. Or was responsible for something like that being done.
Yeah.
And
I just want to say thank you on behalf of maybe her, her in spirit. I feel it.
Well, I know her. Well, you got somebody. I know her parents are dead. Mm-hmm. She could be a grandmother with grandkids, about a dozen. And I had an emotional experience almost with every Korean I met, particularly girls.
Thank
and
you.
Then when that was the most fun I've ever had. And then I extended my arm a couple of times and escorted the staff out and a few things like that. And I meant to have fun. I meant to amuse. I meant to have emotions on a Christian level. I didn't have any desire or anything else. It was all in the sense of relationships, human relationships. Mm-hmm. And
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing the story.
Feel I'm better.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you.